Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is name the final circle object wheelie control. And one small thing I would like to change as far as the second transformation object constraint for link control is to set the map to X rotation to minus 45 min and 45 max. So I apologize, that was my mistake. I wanted more sway, but it was curving in the wrong direction, and we will test it here. So you can see the way that the front bends a little bit more for the handlebars. Next, we'll select the front wheel and the lower fork and Control P to parent. Then we will select the rear wheel and swing arm and Control P to parent as well. We will use the pivot points from these new parents to guide the location and rotation of their future movement. Select the front wheel and Shift S to cursor to selected. Shift A to add a plane. Then we'll select the rear wheel, Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A to add a plane. And then we'll select both of them and grab on the Z axis to move them down. I'm going to zoom in and line mine up a little bit more. And next I'm going to go to the Object tab and set their visibility to wire, and that's for the viewport display. Okay, so I'm going to give these two planes a name, the front being suspension F control, and suspension R control. Great. So now I'll go to the Object Constraint tab, and with the lower fork selected, we will add a transformation constraint, extrapolate, local to local, and our target will be the suspension F controller. For the map from location, we will set the Z to minus 0.1 min and 0.1 max for starters. And for map 2, we will set the Z location for 1 min and minus 0.5 max, also for starters. And from the side here, I can see I need to make a few changes, so the goal is to get it lined up. Not absolutely perfect, but close enough to the suspension controller. So I'm going to stick with 0.7 min and minus 0.5. Seems like it's lined up pretty good. And this is yet another part where you can add a limit location for the z-axis on the lower fork so that it can't go below a certain point. So again, I did not factor in the limit location for majority of this stuff, but as I said before, keep in mind it is a feature that you can add in. Next, we'll add a curve to guide the lower forks up and down movement on the z-axis. So we will Shift S cursor to selected. And then Shift A to add a Bezier curve. Then we will tap to go into edit mode and select the curved portion. And I'm going to rotate on the z-axis minus 45, and that should straighten it out. There we go. And now I'm just going to rotate it at an angle that basically lines up with the lower fork's z-axis. Just taking a look at the angles here, and in this case I went with 64.70 degrees, and it seems like it looks okay. Next, Shift S to select the handlebars and Control P to parent. After that, select the lower fork, add another object constraint, limit rotation. I'm going to select X and Y, and I'm setting the min to 0 and the max to match just about where it should line up, which in this case it is minus 25 degrees. So I don't know if that's the perfect setting, but it looks all right from this angle, so I'm going to leave it as is. And we'll set this to local space. You can see here when we test the rotation, it works for the z-axis, but not the x and not the y, only z. Cool, so I'll minimize that. So now I'm going to set a clamp to object constraint for the sus angle, which is the curve that we modified earlier, and select the main axis as the z, and let's go ahead and test that out. There. That looks great. All right, so now let's move on to the suspension R control. Add an object constraint transformation. Extrapolate, local to local space. Map from, we will set as location, and from the z-axis we will set it to minus 0.1 min and 0.1 max. And for the map 2 we set to rotation, and we will change the order so that it is X, Z, and Y. And on the Z, we will set it to minus 0.5. And 1. And let's test that out. Seems a bit off, so I might make some changes. Let's take a look here. And I guess I'll bring this down to a 0.2, and it matches up pretty well with the suspension R control line. It's a bit loose with the up-down movement, which is fine as well because it's a high tension area, so I'm okay with those results. Now as we can see, the front lower fork is a bit snappy, so I want to turn that down a little bit if possible. So I'm going to go back and take a look at the map 2, and we'll bring that down a little bit. Next, I created a landscape using these settings, so make sure to have that feature enabled in your Blender preferences, and just take a look at these settings for a moment to match them up. I'm just going to append a dirt material, which I will apply now. Just feel free to add whatever material you like. Mine came from Polyhaven, so I will leave a link in the description for that as well. I'm just going to UV unwrap this to make the material look decent. and select the edges on either side of this mesh in edit mode. There we go. E to extrude. And then I'm going to scale on the x-axis. Just a decent amount. Maybe a little bit more. And there. Cool. And as you can see, it stretched out the texture, so I'm just going to go into face mode and select all the faces on either side. And then unwrap. And it should be fine. There we go. Next, I also set up a camera on the side of the motorcycle. Just wanted to line it up a little bit from a good angle. Lastly, Control P to parent the camera to the main control. I'm just going to add a timeline so I can do a quick animation. With the main control selected, on the first frame I will press I to insert location, and then on the timeline we will enter the last frame, which is 250. Move the bike forward to the other side and press I to insert location. Great. Go ahead and save and play. And it does what it's supposed to, so just going across the screen, but obviously there's no interaction as of yet. So we'll move on to that part next. And also I want to select each of the suspension controllers, and I'm going to subdivide them, and the number of cuts I will enter in is 4. Tab out of edit mode, and next we will go to the modifier tab and select shrink wrap. The target we want to be the landscape. And the same goes for the rear suspension control, shrink wrap with the landscape as its target. So as you can see, it's a fairly smooth follow of the surface below. So it doesn't have to be perfect, just enough to get enough movement on the z-axis. Just enough to give you a visual idea on what's going on at the surface level below the tires on a lower scale. Next we will add an object constraint, shrink wrap, and select the landscape. And for the mode, we will select project, and afterwards leave everything alone. And next we will select the front suspension control, add an object constraint, the target landscape, also project, and leave everything else alone. And we'll test it out. So as we can see, the front suspension is a bit strong, so I'll do some tweaking to turn that down a bit. In this case, it was just setting the min to 0.1 instead of 0.2. For the swing arm, I made a few more changes as well by leaving the min at minus 0.5 on the Z and the max. After a bit of playing around with it, I settled for a max of 2. That seems to be okay. Next, we'll select the body. And as I said in the previous video, you can hide the 2 transformations that affect the wheelie control so that you can just rotate the bike on its own and it will be affected that way rather than having the unwanted wheelie effect all the time. So last thing we'll do is select the main control and add an object constraint shrink wrap as well. Set it to landscape, project, and leave everything else alone. And it gives us a bit of the camera shake effect as it actually bumps along the surface as well. So I also wanted to render this out just to get an idea on how it looked. So I hid the front and rear suspension controls from render view. And let's take a look. In the next video, we'll focus on setting up wires and the chain to follow along with the other constrained objects. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.